Welcome to the Intel Technology to Market Accelerator at UC Berkeley, Lecture 4, Channels and Partners. Now, this is an area that can often be very confusing for startups. The first question we have here on the slide, how does your product get to customers? It can be complicated. It's a little more straightforward. Who are your partners? Who are your suppliers? Who's strategic, who's not? That is an area that can have particular confusion, especially for early stage companies. So pay attention today. We'll have some good stories. Now, in terms of where channels, which we're going to talk about first, fits on the business model canvas, it's here, and it's really about how does your product get delivered to customers. And just looking broadly, there are really two big buckets. There are physical channels and there are virtual channels. And of course, we're all aware of all kinds of physical channels. We go to the store, pick something up, order something on Amazon.com, and have it delivered. And of course, especially with virtual products, there are virtual channels. So buying an app for your iPhone or Android device is a example where the product is both purchased virtually, that is, you buy it online, and it's delivered virtually. And certainly, these two kinds of things can trade off. You can sell through a virtual channel, say through Amazon.com, and you can deliver through a physical channel. And we'll talk a little bit more about these as we go along. Let's get a little bit more specific. So that's a question when you're a startup. How do you want to get your product to your customer? You can certainly deliver it yourself, get it there through someone else, get it there through a retail site, sell it to a wholesaler who then sells it to retail sites, and you can have it bundled with other goods and services. Intel, who sponsors this, of course, bundles their chips with other people's products, inside of other people's products, and that's certainly an option. Now, one of the things I'll say about this at the top is that we're asking you to do 100 customer interviews to create customer intimacy. And one of the things when you think about channels and how you get your product to your customers is the degree of intimacy you're going to have with customers as you do it. We'll talk about this throughout the lecture, but the farther you are away from your customer, the more embedded your product is, the less feedback you get from customers, and the harder it is to create demand. So as we move through this lecture, really think about that as we talk about different strategies, is how intimate is it going to make you with the customer to deliver through those channels, and how much feedback are you going to get? Let's break down the web channels, because even here there's a lot of complexity. Starting at the top, you can do dedicated e-commerce. Set up your own website, sell directly to customers. You can sell through a platform app store, like the Apple App Store or Google Play. You can do two-step distribution. You can have Amazon.com warehouse your product, and Amazon sells it and ships it, but you put it in their warehouse. You can certainly do it through aggregators. Someone like Zappos sells shoes, and they get shoes from a lot of different companies and sell them directly to customers. Sell through social commerce, and kind of a newer one is flash sales like Groupon, really, and that bundles a whole bunch of different promotion mechanisms. But to show even something, when we talk about something like the web, it in and of itself is a very complicated platform, and I think that's something you'll notice when you start thinking about your own channels. Even what seems like the simplest channels end up being complicated, and these can be a huge hurdle for startups. Let's talk about some physical channels. Of course, again, you can sell web online and deliver physically. You can also use what's called an original equipment manufacturer. So you sell to someone who makes something that then sells to the end customer. And again, a good example of that would be Intel, who makes chips and sells them to folks like HP and Dell. They bundle those into computers, and then the HP would sell the computers directly to customers. So in that case, HP would be an original equipment manufacturer for Intel. There are people called system integrators, and usually system integrators are delivering some bundle of services, and that's what differentiates them from original equipment manufacturers. So a system integrator, an example would be, say, someone who's setting up identity management systems inside of a company. So they're going to be login directories, there's going to be security software, there's going to be a whole bunch of different software, but essentially they're delivering that as a bundle to a company as one solution, and your product could be one of the products bundled into that solution that the system integrator is selling. Next, you, of course, could run your own sales force and sell directly to customers, and we'll talk more about that through the lecture. You can use a value-added reseller. And system integrators and value-added resellers, there's often a little bit of confusion about the difference, and frankly, there just is confusion on the difference. But usually, evaluated, a system integrator is someone who puts a bunch of things together and bundles into one solution. And a value-added reseller really does something pretty much similar. Of course, you can sell to dealers. You can sell to distributors who then sell to dealers, and distributors who sell to mass merchants as well. So you can see you can go direct at the top and quite indirectly at the bottom of this diagram. Now, one of the key points about using different channels is it costs you. If you have your own sales force, you have to pay your salespeople. If you sell through someone like Amazon or through the Apple App Store, they take a percentage of the sales price. There's also something called discounted pre-purchase, and that means they buy from you, but often that gets into something where they have the right to return, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But one thing to think about is your channel affects the economics of your business, and let's just dive into one example of that on this slide. So if you do direct sales, if you look over on the right, your product will have a list price that you want to sell it to your end consumer. Now, with many, many products, of course, you have to give a discount to the customer. And certainly if someone buys a lot of your product, buys in bulk, you are going to potentially want to give them a bigger discount. So usually your list price is discounted. And of course, when you do a discount, you don't get that money. The customer gets to keep it. So that goes off of this bar, which is basically the total amount of money that is available to spread around your company. So you take some out for the discount, and then if you look over on the left, there's cost of goods. So presumably making your product costs something. Of course, a lot of virtual products, once you make the first one, making the next one doesn't cost you very much. And that's why some of those business models can be appealing, but it certainly costs you typically to deliver your product, and that comes out of what the customer pays you. And then what's left over is basically money your company gets to keep. And those abbreviations there are things like SG&A is Sales General Administration, and R&D is, of course, Research and Development. And with the cash you get to keep, some of it, SG&A is really your overhead, your rent, paying your bookkeeper, keeping your website up, things that are not directly related to the cost of the individual product. It's sort of what we call keeping the lights on. It costs you something to keep the lights on, and typically you allocate a percentage of your revenue to keeping the lights on, keeping your company in business. That's your SG&A. Of course, there's R&D, and especially if you're an early stage company, you're probably spending a lot of money on research and development while improving your product, adding features to your prototype, those kinds of things. I have to take that out of how much money you make. And of course, the rest is profit. You get to put in the bank and hopefully someday pay out to shareholders. They certainly like, shareholders like dividends. But you can see if you look at direct sales, you as a company get to keep a lot of the pie. Let's go to an example where you use a reseller. And if you look there on the right to the reseller bucket, you can see the end consumer. Again, there's a list price. In this case, the reseller gets to set the discount, not you, which is something to watch out for, because of course they may want to discount it a lot, and You may be doing things on a percentage basis, so that discounting a lot affects how much money you make, and maybe doesn't even affect how much they make. This is why business development is a useful skill to have inside your company. But you can see as you add people in the supply chain between you and your end customer, you get to keep less of the total price paid for your goods. And certainly if you add a distributor in there as well, you can see the distributor here in orange, they're going to take a cut too, again cutting the amount of money that you make. And obviously if they're doing a lot of work, this can be economically make the most sense for you, but at the same time, this is a decision you have to make as a business. So let's talk about the channel as a customer. And one of the things that's really interesting about this is that if you think about it, of course, you have the end customer that's using your product in whatever end application it is. Again, think of an Intel processor, right? It's in your computer, doing great work. But the channel is also a customer. What do we mean by that? Well, if you want someone to embed your product in theirs, you have to sell them as well, right? You have to sell the OEM. You have to do an economic deal with the OEM. You need to collect money from the OEM. You need to provide after-sales support for the OEM. So you actually end up with two customers. You end up with your end user as a customer, and you end up with the person embedding your product or reselling your product in the case of VARs. And it does get to this question of who is the customer. And of course, the answer is both people are customers, because if your end user doesn't want your product or there's something wrong with it, then you don't have a business. And if OEMs aren't interested in it either, you don't have a business too. And let me give you an example here. This is a great example of these channels are more complicated than they appear. Oh, I forgot to talk about OEM licensing. So then we'll talk about the complications of channels. But well, let's talk about complications of revenue models here. I think that's fair enough on this slide, which is if you are licensing or you are a small part of a complicated product, then you get a very small percentage of the revenue. And again, this may make sense if you have almost no cost of sales and things are done at volume. You can make a lot of money this way. There's certainly companies that do. But you can see how when someone, an OEM, is integrating your product or licensing from you, then the bulk of revenue goes to them, and you are a tiny slice. So they're going to pay you a little slice for your, which you get to keep for your profit, SG and R&A, and your cost of goods. So again, just bear in mind that the more complicated the channel gets, the less you get to keep for yourself. It can make sense, but it's something you need to figure out as you go. And so let me start in with the example, and I'm just going to make the case here that this shows why you really need to understand the customer and the business that you are going into. It can often seem simple in the beginning when you don't know much about the channel, you don't know much about who gets paid for what, and you don't really understand the business. But this is absolutely why, to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to dive in and understand the specifics. You have to dive in and meet experts. You have to be able to draw these kinds of diagrams about your business and understand what the economics are. Let's talk about book publishing. Simple, right? Somebody writes a book, somebody publishes it, gets shipped to a warehouse, goes to the bookstore, you pick it up, pay some money, everybody gets a cut, all good. Well, and yes, you do have a chain, right? You've got the author, who actually is not on this diagram, the publisher, a distributor of the published book, the person who prints it, a wholesaler who stocks many, many books, sells those to retailers, and of course customers who come in at the end. Now, let's dive another level down on this. What percent of retail does each of these get? So typically, right, the retailer gets to keep 40%, distributor 10%, wholesaler 15%, publisher 35%. So of that 20 bucks the customer pays for a book, you can see here on the slide who gets to keep what. If you read down to the bottom of the slide, you'll see less any discount they offer the customer. Let's dive one layer down into that. Aha. Wait a minute. It's just gotten more complicated. So let's talk about the actual economics of book publishing. I'm going to start on the right. Look at the word markup, right? Retailer buys the book for a certain amount and marks it up and sells the customer what they get. Of course, they're going to have to discount of that. I'm sure you guys have all walked in and seen the $5 book bin, the $1 book bin, those things. So that the markup doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's a markdown. There are things like credit guarantees, return rights, payment guarantees that go all the way back, meaning if the retailer accepts books or the wholesaler accepts books and those books are not sold, they have the right to return them or to get money in compensation for the books that weren't sold. And those rights are written into contracts. There are allowances, and you see payments do go back and forth between them, but the channel is much, much more complicated. And this is not unusual. This is honestly not a particularly complicated channel. You can look at it another way, right? Which is again, starting over on the right with the retailer. The retailer spends money merchandising the titles. There's all magazines. For things that don't sell, they get to return back to the wholesaler. And those returns kind of propagate all the way back through the printer and publisher. So even in something as simple as a book, a plain old physical object, the channel can be complicated, and the typical economic structure of the channel can in fact be very complicated. And a book that is published by the printer is not necessarily one that is sold, and one that the publisher gets to recognize revenue for. And this is why it's very important to have business experience on your team and in your advisors, because understanding these issues and the accounting issues and the revenue recognition issues and those things as you're growing a business are things that become really critical to your success. Let's look at another example here in medical devices. So this is a slide from a company that went through the Lean Launchpad training called Optics. And I really like this slide because they clearly differentiate that in the medical field, there are two ways you can place them. They're high-value medical products, so things like cardiovascular stents, where you almost have to sell direct. And one of the reasons you have to sell direct there is because you're doing a lot of education, you need a lot of feedback, and it's an expensive product. Like, you're really selling to the individual doctors who are using this high-cost item. And you want to be directly connected to those high-cost customers. There are other kinds of products in the medical world that are commodity products. Take latex gloves, right? Very common, it's commodity. People are probably buying on price instead of on the unique features that these products provide. You don't have to do any education. I hate the words no customer feedback, but you certainly need less feedback from your customer. They're inexpensive. And that's something typically sold, in fact, almost always sold through distributors. So this just goes to show, depending on the kind of business you are in, your channel may vary. And this is something you need to understand about your business. The other thing you'll notice here on the right is that the customers are different. So a lot of times in medicine, people think they're selling to doctors. Most often they are not selling to individual doctors. So if you're in the medical field, you may actually be selling to purchasing administrators. You may be doing a complicated sale to reimbursement directors and people in those kinds of positions who really drive the economics of the hospital, not the individual doctors. So again, get out there, meet with customers, meet with experts, diagram your channel, understand what are the different avenues you can use to get your product into the hands of customers, and you're going to have to make decisions, especially early on as a startup. Here's another great slide from the Manoptics team. They talk about having 2 sales strategies. This is also very common for startups. And what that means is that when you start your company, you're going to have to sell direct. You're going to want that customer feedback. You're going to want to update your product based on what your customers need. You're going to want to understand them. And of course, you're going to have to generate demand. You're going to have to do the hard work of going out there and meeting with people and convincing them that they should use your product instead of someone else's. They should spend money on you instead of spending it on someone else. And that often requires an expensive, dedicated sales force. And often founders spend a lot of time out there selling, and that's okay. Once the business is better set, you've built your reputation, then you can continue with your direct sales force, but use a distributor, have the distributor sell to a network of customers, basically leverage that relationship that you've built up over time and your reputation in order to sell to a lot more people, right? A distributor probably already has a lot more customers than you have, and so you can leverage them, but they're not going to go with you early. You've got to prove that your product works, the customers want it, how much they're willing to pay for it, all that. Show that, and then you can switch to another sales strategy. So think about how the sales strategy you have today might not be the sales strategy you have a year from now. And again, that's okay. That's pretty typical in a startup. All right, let's talk about partners. There it is, box number 7. Who are partners and suppliers? Well, first, let's talk about what a partner is. So a partner is someone who has shared economics with you. And that means they're basically, there's mutual success and mutual failure in a way that's a much deeper relationship than just, is Amazon.com selling your book at all? Because if, Amazon.com can sell anyone's book, there's not really shared economics there. There's not mutual success or failure. Amazon.com is not going to go out of business because you didn't finish writing your book, right? There's really not that level of integration. Certainly, often in partnerships, there's co-development and invention, meaning as you both learn about customers and learn how your new technology affects what customers want and those things, that you are both updating your products or updating a product you're doing together. There's really a lot of working together. Now, the interesting thing about this is that often startups want to partner with larger companies that have more resources, companies that have more experience. And something to bear in mind all the time is you are a startup. You are a distraction. They already have a business. They're already busy all the time. And it is your job, if you want to work with a partner, to convince them to spend time on what you are doing as opposed to the time they are already spending on other things. So they have to do less of something else to work with you. And that can be very, very hard. Even if someone likes what you do, that doesn't mean they're going to spend time on it. That doesn't mean they're going to pay for it. Let's talk a little bit more about why you have partners. So, of course, one is just faster time to market, right? They already have customers. They already know how to sell to them. They already have a sales force. They can collect money. They can, they can do lots of things that you as a startup may not be that good at. They probably have a broader product offering, so they can attract more customers. The customers want to buy multiple things from them. They may be more efficient in using capital because they already have warehouses and salespeople going out and sales calls and all those things. They probably know more about their customers than you do, and they can give you the opportunity to access new markets. For example, if you have international distribution partners. So certainly using partners can be a way to accelerate your business. But again, remember, you are a startup. You are something new and different that they have to spend time on. This working with partners is fraught with peril for startups, and we will talk about that. So let's talk about different types of partners. So one is strategic alliances. And there's some examples at the bottom. Starbucks partnered with PepsiCo to bottle and distribute Frappuccinos, right? So basically Starbucks had the recipe, but Pepsi had the manufacturing capacity, Pepsi had the distribution network, Pepsi had the bottling network, and so that was a partnership where Starbucks got to distribute one of their products at scale, and Pepsi got a new product for their product line. So win-win, right? New product plus expanded distribution for each of the partners. So essentially, they built a whole new product together. So we can talk about joint business development. So Intel's a good example of that, where they offered products complementary to, say, Microsoft's operating system. So Intel and Microsoft would jointly advertise, jointly market, and jointly sell to get PC vendors to use the Wintel combination inside of their computers. Now, it is a startup mistake to count on strategic alliances and joint partnerships. I'll say this a few times throughout this. It is a mistake to count on it. It's great if you can get it, but again, you are a distraction. And it's worth, as you get experienced advisors in your business, to talk about this. Talk about what has succeeded and what has failed for them in this regard. Just because you think you can have other people doing work for you does not mean it's going to be a success. Let's just pick even a large company, it can be a failure. Let's look at Boeing, right? Boeing decided to outsource all the different parts of their new 787 plane, and it was a complete disaster. They had trouble integrating things together. People didn't deliver on time. One person if someone doesn't deliver the wings, then they can't put the wingtips on it, and all these kinds of things. So working with partners can dramatically up the complexity of your business, and that's something to bear in mind. Let's talk a little bit about some of these risks. So the first one we just call impedance mismatch. And what does that mean? That means you're a startup, you're low on cash, you need things to happen quickly. Partners are typically large, successful companies. They make decisions slowly, and they don't really need anything to happen right now. And that's an impedance mismatch. You need now, they're fine with later. And of course, their longest schedule becomes your longest item. So if it takes them a year to close a deal, it's going to take you a year to get your deal closed, even if they start. Another problem is really no clear ownership of the customer, which is, well, if your product's deeply embedded, the customer may never even know that you exist. But if you're a part of the product that's visible to customers, the customer may think that your partner is the person they have the relationship with. And certainly, your partners like to keep relationships with their customers. So there can often be mismatches there where they don't want you calling on their customers. You, of course, want to call on the customers because you want to learn, you want to build your own reputation. But there can just be a lot of confusion over ownership, certainly a lack of shared product vision. You may be the new wave of technology. There's a new vision for the product, maybe a lower cost product or more widely distributed product. And your partner, well, they're pretty much sticking to their own business that has been successful for them in the past, and that could just show there might be different objectives in a relationship. Another key issue is churn in partners' strategy or personnel. Particularly the personnel is an issue, which is often you have a champion, you find a champion inside a larger corporation that wants your product for that company. And They will handle the meetings, they will set you up, they'll show everyone how strategic and important your product is. And this is usually to build their own reputation, which is great, right? They're one of the people who's seen as an innovator inside that company, and they're bringing innovative stuff like what you have into their company, and that's how they define themselves. Of course, then they get reassigned to the other side of the world, to a different job, or go to a new company, and suddenly you have nothing. You have nobody who is your champion, and that can be a big risk. And of course, IP issues, who developed what, when something new comes in, or work has to be done to integrate your product into a partner's product. Who owns that? You'll see a lot of ink in contracts about this issue if you do a partnership contract. And of course, partnerships can be difficult to unwind or end, and this can be a huge risk to startups. So if you promise a certain amount of product to a partner and then decide you need to be in a different business, you pivot, you are actually still under a legal obligation to provide that. They can sue you and all those kinds of things. So again, that gets both to the impedance mismatch issue and that they're going to want some guarantees that you can deliver product because they don't want to disappoint their customers. But you may decide you don't want to deliver product at some point in your business. And again, that's just an impedance mismatch. And that's something to think about as you go forward with partnerships. In terms of wrapping up, should you take an investment from a large company? This can be very complicated. Again, they have an existing business. They have existing momentum. You may decide you want to pivot. So there are risks here. Let's face it, they're interested in their bottom line, not yours. Obviously, if your product is strategic to theirs, they may help you along, but that's a conversation. That's not automatic. Their job is not to make you successful. Their job is to make themselves successful. And building that synergy can be very complicated. If you're going to sell as part of their product, remember, if someone from their venture side wants to invest in you strategically, that still does not solve all of these problems we've been talking about this whole lecture around, do their salespeople want to sell you? Do their product people want to integrate your technology into their product, right? It has to come from the business side. Someone at a very high level on the business side has to say, this is a priority to get this startup's component into our products, and we're going to sell it, we're going to build it in the product. That is not going to come from the venture investors at a large company. That kind of strategic push to get the operational people in that company to do the work. So you need sponsorship at a very senior business level, not just the venture level. And the strategy for that is simply just try to get sales deals, right? Try to get them to sell your product and get that as the money you come in. There's something called a prepaid deliverable. So maybe they pay you $100,000 as an advance on sales, and that's some working capital for you. And then as they sell, you kind of burn that off, that $100,000, and maybe you get $10,000 a unit sold. They sell, the first 10 they sell chips away at $100,000, and then the 11th one they sell, you get $10,000, right? That'd be a prepaid deliverable, is getting that $100,000 up front, so you could actually deliver the product. And that could be a strategy with these larger partners that they don't invest, but they give you money ahead of sales. And another strategy is often what's called warrants, but essentially stock, giving stock to a large company based on sales success. Meaning if they sell, they get warrants in your company and get that economic model. So just to wrap things up here, don't confuse partners for early evangelists, right? Partners have their business. You need to go out and do the evangelist's work to get this done. Excuse me. Don't confuse partnering with a startup strategy. You need a strategy to be successful without partners. You need a strategy for direct success. If you can find a partnering strategy that gives you an unfair advantage, that is a unique thing. But underneath it all, recognize you don't matter to a large partner. You need to figure out how you can matter to the end customer, to the person who's ultimately paying. And if you really matter to that end customer, then partners will help you out. But that's really what you got to focus on. How are you delivering value to customers, and then the partners may well come along. And again, just to wrap up, your ultimate sales strategy, how your company is actually going to sell down the road, is probably not going to be how you're selling today. Once you get reputation, once you scale up, once you have satisfied customers, then you can switch to distributors and more complicated sales models. You may well have to sell direct early. And again, that just gets to, do you matter? How do you build up the credibility so that you matter? And then the final piece and most important piece of this lecture is, remember, channels are complicated. And you need to go out and do the work. You need to understand the channels. You need to understand how it works. You need to understand the economics. You need to be able to draw it. You need to talk to people who have deals with these partners and distributors, who understand the kind of deals they get. You can get a lot of great advice from somebody who's done one of these deals with someone you want as your distributor, and understand the economics, who was important, how the decision was made, all those kinds of things. It's straight customer discovery. But remember, partners are a kind of customer, and you need to understand them just like regular customers. Go out there and do your customer interviews. Go out there and learn. Go diagram your channel. Go diagram the economics. We wish you success.